Greetings, I'm Scott Usher. I'm the creative director here at Havenlight, and this is Havenlight Artist Spotlight, and we are in the studio today with Jordan Ring-Sakabe. Jordan, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be back.
Good to be back here at the Lake Club. I see you have your logo gear with you today.
I do. I happen to sign all my paintings with a stamp, and I made a hat out of that same stamp design. And I was like, sweet, let's just bring it in.
Yeah. What we had the pleasure of today is not only did you bring in a couple of paintings that we haven't had the chance to see before, but we also had a collector who has bought other pieces of work, happen to show up today, and have a chance to see these other paintings that you've done. What's it like to have, of course you get to meet your collectors, but you don't always get to meet your collectors.
Right.
What's it like to hang out and get to talk through your artwork with a collector that's come in?
It is the best part of this job because ultimately what I want to do as an artist, right? What I want to do specifically as a person who paints like religious content is that I'm hoping to encourage faith in Christ ultimately, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you have someone there who, has already developed a relationship with the painting and that they like it and they're already like planning on acquiring it, then you can kind of give them a little bit more insight into like some of your artistic choices, right? And how those choices were oriented around like delivering a specific message. Yeah. And so being able to give those like insights and stuff to that person and let them know just like, maybe some of the fun stories about the production process as well, like is super fun. And then you get to see like you get to see the person respond to it, and that's so cool because often if someone acquires, right, like, and you're not around to see it, you don't actually know how they feel about it and what sort of relationship they have to it. But you were there, like one of the people like ended up kind of was moved to tears at one point, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of seeing that like there's a real like spiritual, emotional depth that like that these kind of works can have is hugely rewarding, and it helps motivate, future work and stuff. Yeah.
You know it, you hope it, you just don't get to see it every single day.
Yeah.
And like I say, to walk in, we kid around in here because we have the shows that travel through Costco. But, one of the things is every show we're at a Costco, you can count on crying with somebody.
Oh, interesting.
During the period of time in the aisles of Costco, because they come up and they relate to you this story and experience and how the artwork has moved them to it, through it, from it, and just tears, And it's one thing to do a beautiful picture of the Grand Canyon, and it's and you can move people to tears with that, but it's a different kind of tears. It's a different intersection that the artwork is having with the individual on the other side. Yeah,
for sure. Like before doing religious art, I painted a lot of birds, and I painted a lot of like wildlife and still lifes, and some figurative work as well. And my mentors and some of my teachers who I like studied under around that whole time, they really wanted to push me into doing more controversial work, right? To be more like almost like stir up the pot, like create a scandal a little bit, like do something that like a heavy emphasis on originality as opposed to like tradition, right? And as opposed to like these kind of more affirmative and positive sort of like approaches. And where I really found was like comfortable and where I really enjoyed making art the most was like things that celebrated something that was actually closer to my heart, right? And scandal's just not close to my heart, Like I have
not a scandalous man.
I'm not a very scandalous person. Yeah. I don't really like going around making, having a disagreeable time with people and making everyone like super uncomfortable. Like I'm not very interested in that. But what I am interested in doing is like I've personally found a lot of healing through Christ, right? And I've found that like when I've devoted things that I could have, like time and like money and materials that I could have just spent on myself, when I like end up giving that up for like something more important, like I find that it touches people's lives and hearts. Like I'm able to do paintings that make people cry in the Havenlight offices, and it's just the best.
Yeah. And you sit there and say, an image is Christ. doesn't always have to be an image of Christ.
It might be his mom.
With people. It might be his mom. Could be a piece like "Pray for Us."
Hey, funny you should have mentioned that, because here we have.
It happens to be
Pray
right
for
here.
Us.
Yes.
Yeah. So here we have, like you just mentioned, Jesus' mother here, and right now I'm a recent convert to Catholicism. When people watch this, I might be like a veteran convert. I don't know. But it's funny, you can have someone who's maybe a lifelong Catholic who never really goes into studying all the stuff that maybe a convert feels like they have to study, right?
Yeah.
In order to be sort of okay making that sort of a decision. And so for me, a big hurdle in the journey into Catholicism was Mary and the theology surrounding Mary. But I never really approached that discussion and that sort of stuff from a Catholic person's point of view. And I always took things I had learned from other churches to sort of be ew, Catholics worship Mary? That's freaking weird, you're leaving out Jesus? What the heck? And so it wasn't until I actually approached a Catholic person who could respond to my questions, and then I picked up books like the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and then just kind of read the New Testament with sort of trying to understand the Catholic position on stuff. It's then that I realized oh, it's not even just Catholics. Orthodox Christians actually have a lot of overlap with things that they believe and different devotions that involve Mary, and it was a lot less scandalous than I thought it was going to be. I kind of thought that if you're a Trinitarian Christian, right, you might worry is Mary somehow on par with Jesus and the Father and the Holy Spirit? And as I would work on paintings like this and try to understand that kind of stuff deeper, I'd constantly find that no, that's actually not what is believed or taught.
Yeah. Semi-deatic in what she has done and what she does.
Yeah.
And, you were talking a minute ago, boy, what about these people who kind of go through an orthodoxy? One of the things about Mother Mary, which is a very, talk about something that's gaining momentum outside of, here in this state, is this whole idea of Mother Mary, and that she is a semi-deatic female. And it's not uncommon in a lot of different religions. You take Earth Mother from the Native Americans, or Heavenly Mother. Or,
in the LDS context,
in the LDS context, I'll say, wow, there's something that's attractive that's missing from, I'll call it dogma because I don't know another way to describe it, but the dogma of the male-dominated version of things. She has a place, just as Mary Magdalene has a very significant place, that is an above-average play in what's happening. And like I say, it's just, it's really finding adherent.
I think one thing that we would, as Catholics, affirm is that, she, number one, that she is the number one among other saints, right? And she was Christ's first disciple, ultimately, right? And she's also the kind of the ideal model for motherhood in that, could you imagine a teenager nowadays all of a sudden finds out that they're pregnant and they're going to have to give birth in the most humiliating circumstances. People are going to think that she cheated on her fiance, and the stuff that Mary had to go through, at least deserves your respect, right? You might not feel comfortable saying that she's the mother of God, which, when a Catholic says that, Mary's the mother of God, they're not saying that she's the mother of the Trinity, right? She's the mother of the incarnate Word made flesh, right? And so, in that way, we would say that she's the mother of God. But maybe culturally, we need to reorient and really celebrate more the uniqueness of womanhood and motherhood, and that's kind of the sort of what I see in Mary, right? In the end, we call her the Queen of Heaven and Earth, right? Again, not on equal status as the Trinity, but still holding a very important role in the grand scheme of things. Yeah.
So this is kind of the second, I'm not going to call a series, but you have another piece of her that you did that's much more off the Central American vein over this one, which might be more in the Catholic vein.
Yeah.
Why the two?
Yeah, so from the earliest days in the early church, you do see in the archaeological evidence, like there's these different prayers that people have written down, and they ask Mary to pray for them.
Yeah.
And that's a tradition you see continued in several different Christian denominations, but Orthodox and Catholic probably being the most prominent among them.
And my high school sports team.
And your high school Jesuit sports team.
Yeah. Our Mother of Victory, pray for us. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is obviously the inspiration for this painting. Is like in the same way I ask my mom or like friends from church and stuff, people in my men's group to pray for me. Like we do that with people who have gone on and passed on, who were faithful in this life, who call them saints, like if like that's what I would call them and what I believe, but like we believe that Jesus is Lord of the living and not the dead, and so there is that whole thing of praying and asking Mary for prayers, right? Mm-hmm. And so this one is more emphasizing that, whereas the other painting that I did of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a Marian apparition that took place in Mexico City, and on the Tepeyac Hill, like that painting is called Our Rose of Tepeyac. I did that one because, like, you might have respect for the historical person of Mary as depicted in the New Testament, but then there's all these stories like you just mentioned of like Our Lady of Fatima. Yeah. Or Our Lady of Lourdes in France, where like Mary appears to be appearing. I feel like I should have used a different verb. It would seem that Mary is appearing to people in different parts of the world, and there's miracles involved. It's definitely a supernatural experience. If you want to really go down this rabbit hole, there's an interesting one that took place in Egypt at a Coptic Christian church. Really? At a cathedral, yeah. And like literally millions of people saw it. There's pictures, there's videos, and there was a government investigation that went into it that said apparently there was a spirit here that appeared to a bunch of people and was blessing them and was... Anyways, like...
Oh, we're going to have to bring up something on the screen that can get people to this, because I'm sitting there saying, okay, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, like me too, right? Like I haven't seen it, and frankly, it was a little bit of an... should I say obstacle? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. It was kind of an obstacle with coming to the Catholic Church, because I was kind of like, what are all these like Marian apparitions like, and sort of discerning, is this like a good thing even? Like, like, do we need to maybe discern this and like make sure it's not like something malevolent or perhaps, like, can we be certain that like these aren't just like public hallucinations or... Like, and so like I wanted to deeply kind of like study these from not just a Catholic perspective, from skeptical perspectives and stuff. And so I turned on audiobooks and podcasts, and I was like, I'm going to paint this, and I want to figure this out more and learn more about it, especially if I'm going to like, accept this faith as my own. And through that process, like I actually was really surprised at how much good came out of these experiences. People converted to Jesus Christ because of them. People who like were suffering various ailments and stuff were not only claimed to be healed, but like then were examined by scientists and were shown like there's no reason why. And some of those things I think over time can tend to turn superstitious, right? And so like I can understand like some other people being still like or having skepticism about those things. All the stuff surrounding Mary was a lot bigger, but a lot different than what I had initially expected before kind of entering into this space.
So we were talking a little bit how amazing that Mary, came into the role that she played, knowledgeable of how everything was going to end. Mm. Obviously, Christ came into the role that he played, knowledgeable, at least how everything's going to end here in this space. At the particular time that he was here. And Coronation 2 is one of your depictions of that.
Yeah. I like how you kind of open that up, because that is definitely something that I love hearing from my LDS friends, because they definitely emphasize the garden a lot. In other words, like at that moment, Christ it's obvious that he knows what's coming for him, right? And all the things he's going to go through. and he bleeds from every pore. Like the thought of it, and he makes an appeal to his father that if it's okay to not have to go through this, that'd be great. But nevertheless, your will, not mine, be done. And ultimately he continues to go throughout the various events that make up the atonement or passion.
Yeah.
And so one aspect about that whole the passion narrative that stood out to me was the crowning of thorns. And for a couple of reasons. I've heard it said by people like Bishop Robert Barron, and I think he gets it from someone else, that like this is like a symbol, maybe from Fulton Sheen, that this is kind of a symbol of the sins of the ego in a lot of ways. That when Christ is like crowned with the thorns, like a lot of the mental kind of, heady sort of sins that we can be guilty of, Christ is suffering for some of those at this point. Or at least, this is a good symbol of that fact, right? Like, because we see it done in this way. Like, we have pride and we have vain ambitions, and sometimes we want to be a king. We want to be, or at least we want to be treated like one.
Yeah.
And sometimes we want that desire or we want that to happen for us so much that it's kind of a disordered thing, and it affects negatively our life and the life of people around us. Maybe you've experienced people in your life who were like overly ambitious and it ruined their families or something, like I did my job so much and I became the CEO, or like, I became the boss, but like I lost my wife and I lost my kids because of it.
What's the trail of destruction?
Yeah, right. Like that stuff legitimately happens. And, and so I think that's kind of this is a nice way of sort of visually representing how Christ may have dealt with some of those struggles. And the thing that I personally wanted to emphasize more so with this painting in particular is kind of hidden in the fact of its title, too. It's called Coronation 2. I've done a similar piece. And, the crowning or a coronation is really an act done to set apart someone as uniquely authorized to maintain sovereignty over something or some group of people, right?
Ascending to the throne.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so, ironically, in this moment when like the Roman soldiers think that they're like, making fun of this guy because he thinks he's the king of the Jews, they actually are in a visual, obvious way, like recognizing him for our like benefit that this guy was like king. And so, however, under these circumstances, and if this were happening to a person like me, a sinner like me, like I would, of course, have my head down. I don't have the strength to bear like Roman soldiers pressing down like a crown of thorns on my head and then thrusting this purple mantle on me. Like like if it were me, I imagine I'd probably be, assuming the fetal position, and like off in the corner. I wouldn't have the strength to be able to maintain it. And so when I was thinking about like that kind of stuff, I was like, wow, Christ he probably was able to hold his chin high even. Like, because ultimately Christ isn't being subjected to this humiliation in a way that's free of his will and assent. He actively is allowing these people to do these things to him. And so it's much more his decision than their decision. We know he can flip tables, and we know that he can bust out the whip if like needed. But
you go back to the temptation,
Yeah.
If you want to, you can get out of this.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually not really thought of the connection that this might have to the temptations, but that's a great point. But and so without having to portray all of those types of things and more focusing on the fact that Christ is still powerful and sovereign, even at this moment, was the intention of this painting.
Yep. And, again, it's one of those things where it's not a tougher painting to put in your home. It's got to be in the right place, right mind, right place for somebody. Sometimes, you throughout a career, you'll paint an institutional piece. I created this piece. It's really meant to be in a church. Yeah. Do you want to have this in your home every day? I don't know. But man, when I go to church, that's a type of piece. When I go to a church, when I go to a museum, I'm going to see something there that maybe just isn't meant to hang in a home anyway.
Right.
It's in the context of where it's going to be.
Yeah, like I personally too, like I might not have something like this all year round, but like around Easter, it's definitely an awesome reminder because like, ultimately Christ doesn't really tell us in the Bible or anywhere like, hey, you follow me and there will be nothing bad that happens to you. Everything is just great all the time, forever. Thanks for believing in me. No, he says that we have to like bear our crosses. Or Paul exhorts us that like, there's going to be, we're guaranteed suffering, right? Like
it's not days of wine and roses.
Yeah, right. And Christ tells us that that we'll have to love our enemies. Well, you can't love your enemies if you don't have enemies, right? There's obviously going to be some conflict if you take on the title of a Christian, right? Like if you follow Christ, and so. If we just kind of surround ourselves only with like the roses and like the good stuff all year round, we might like tend to fall into like this idea that like God is just out there to grant my wishes and like he's not going to actually give me difficulties in life to make me grow. Mm-hmm. And that's much more the truth. We're going to go through difficult things. There will be suffering inevitably. That has a purpose though. That's like oriented to a greater good. Yeah. Christ went through this suffering and it was oriented to the greater good of our salvation, right? And so, sometimes we have to suffer at the sink while we're trying to, like, clean up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner after our kids, and we're going to have to suffer in that. I know that it's not very much fun having to clean out the garage, but I know my wife loves it when the garage is clean, so I'm just going to do it. Yeah. And so hopefully around Easter, and with an image like this in our homes, we can sort of be like, if Christ was willing to go through that much for me, I could do more for my kids or for my spouse or for, the people who like I'm in charge of at work or something. Yep. Raised by His grace is the story of, or it's a portrayal of the story from Matthew's gospel of when Peter goes out to meet Christ walking on the water during the third or fourth watch. I don't remember which one. One of those.
Yeah, one of those. Yeah. And so there's a couple things about what you've done here that, are making it uniquely yours. One is who you've decided to crew the boat with, or not, the crew's the crew, but you have different people doing different things inside of the boat itself, looking at Christ and Peter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people are pretty familiar with the Jesus and Peter typically being portrayed in this scene. And I wanted to incorporate some of the disciples a little bit more and kind of flesh out perhaps some of the stuff that they might have been doing. So I can already imagine some people being like, hey, you put that in the painting, but that wasn't in the Bible. Nothing in this painting is not in the Bible, right? Yeah. So all of this could be logically deduced from what evidence we do have from those New Testament accounts. And so I think the first character to stand out in addition to Christ and Peter is the man who's standing kind of at the front of the boat and he's holding on to the rope. Yeah. That is Matthew. In Matthew's gospel, we find out about this account. And all the other gospels talk about Jesus walking on the water, but none of them mention Peter except for Matthew's. So I placed him in that prominent position in this composition for that reason, so that we can maybe have some sort of insight into maybe perhaps why he was so, prepared in that way to be able to provide that account of that sort of telling. Hopefully, when we think about this is the earliest days of the church, right? And the church is just filled with the disciples, and we're also Christ's disciples too. Like Mary, may or may not have had some sort of a role in what we might call a leadership, sort of hierarchical structure. But one thing that I'm hoping to portray in this painting, and hopefully a viewer on sort of a deeper viewing could appreciate in this, is that the church is guided about by the cross, right? And it's full of the disciples, and ultimately it's the cross that makes it so that way miracles like the one we have happening in front of us can take place. when we feel like we're drowning or that we're like going to be submerged, we're approached by a person who can, literally walk over sin, and walk over darkness, and like we're getting enveloped by it. Maybe we're so addicted to something that, it's like we feel like there is no hope, but like Christ is the hope that pulls us out of that kind of stuff. Bringing it in here today, like kind of made me realize something that I had stumbled on unintentionally, and I think we see sort of an homage being like paid to the Old Testament account of Moses parting the waters of the Red Sea. In that, in front of Christ here on this painting, the waters do seem to sort of start to disperse in front of him, and a path is clearly laid out in between him and Peter. And so I think just hopefully in this painting, we can find like a lot to learn, that through life and through darkness, like literally this is in the middle of the night, right? So in our worst moments, Christ is there.
Yeah.
And he's in charge, and he can meet us where we're at. And we might be sinking, like Christ isn't the kind of person to be like, looking at the sinful world.
You should come to the boat. Make sure you get to the boat because that's where I am.
Yeah, he can.
He's not doing that.
Yeah, he's going out of the boat, and I think he's kind of showing us ultimately that like through faith and things like that, we are able to stand even on like the most tenuous of circumstances, right? So. Like, it's heady maybe, but like, these are honestly the kind of thoughts that like you kind of want to be able to have a work of art, like especially if it's a religious work of art, be able to function to help, teach the faith to maybe yourself, first of all, right? Like maybe you don't know exactly how deeply committed you are to this stuff as an artist, but then I'll paint something like this, and then people will ask like about the decision-making process, and then it'll be like a moment to help like evangelize. The waters are a metaphor of like the unknown and for darkness and for sin, and it just doesn't faze God at all. And in the same way he led the Israelites through it and he led Peter out of it, he leads us out of it too, if we reach out and let us be raised by his grace.
Beautiful work.
Thank you.
Yep, and thanks for coming in and sharing all these paintings with us today. And as usual, a interesting discussion every single time. And I want to say thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. I'm Scott Usher. This has been Haven Light Artist Spotlight, and we have been here with Jordan Ring-Sakabe.